Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. I'm going to enjoy this.
Welcome to the launch of Small Business for Reform.
Nigel Farage is about to tell you how he and the Reform Party are on the side of small businesses and basically protectors of the underdog against the big businesses and the elites.
What you have in the room, and they've all travelled today to London, are 300 small business owners.
Okay, but there are 5.6 million small businesses in the UK, and you've got 300 of the leaders of the small businesses in that room, and those 300, by definition, are the sorts of people who would choose to come to a Reform Party rally. Not exactly representative. Now again, his message here is that he and the Reform Party are on the side of small businesses, whereas other politicians only listen to big businesses. But see if you can spot the flaw.
Government only listens to big business. It's the big businesses that take you to Wimbledon. It's the big businesses that take people out for dinner.
Okay, so other politicians only look after the interests of big business because big business buys them dinners and trips and stuff. But then you go on to say this in the same speech.
Now, back to the serious stuff. The first thing I want to do is say a big thank you. A very big public thank you to Lord Bamford and JCB Excavators for their recent donation to us of £200,000.
Okay, so your message here is that politicians who get freebies from big business can't be trusted to look after the interests of small businesses, but your Reform Party, who gets massive donations of hundreds of thousands of pounds from a billionaire, Lord Bamford, and one of the biggest corporations in the UK, they can be trusted to look after the interests of small business. Am I getting that right, Nige? And you know what that money is actually buying? Because he actually admits...
And they've given a lot of money, over £10 million to the Conservatives over the years.
Which means the Reform Party is being funded by the same people who funded the Conservative Party, and JCB will expect the same results, namely policies that favour the rich. But the guest of honour in all this was a guy called Kevin Byrne, who was the co-founder of Check a Trader, and he was brought on to be the voice of your average person running a small business.
When I sold my company, I sold it for more money than most people could think of.
Imagine claiming to speak for the average person and saying, I have more money than you could possibly imagine.
When I sold my business, I went through an incredibly dark tunnel. So I'm waking up now and there's no reason to get out of bed.
You sold your business for so much money that the suffering, the dark tunnel that you're going through now is because you don't need to actually go to work anymore. The UK is facing a mental health crisis that is being driven by the cost of living, with record levels of poverty. That's where the mental health crisis is really coming from, but your dark tunnel is because you don't need money. Again, this is the guy who Reform is bringing on to represent your average person running a small business.
Should I live the rest of my life here and then die and pay inheritance tax at 40%? There is no reason for me to stay in the UK, and how sad is that?
Yeah, how sad actually is that people are able to pass on £325,000 to their loved ones completely tax-free, but anything above that faces a percentage tax, which only affects the richest 4% of the country. And now our poor little billionaire is thinking he might have to leave the country, but sadly, Nigel Farage points out another problem he's going to face.
There is now talk of an exit tax. You want to sell your business, you want to move, there'd be an exit tax. And there's rumours that could come into the budget. That would mean that people just wouldn't invest here.
Just to translate what he just said, if he's saying he doesn't want an exit tax because then people won't want to invest here in the first place, what he's saying is he wants people to be able to come to the UK, make millions off the backs of the work of British employees who right now are going through a cost of living crisis because the UK has some of the worst financial inequality of any Western country. And then once they've made their fortune, take all that money away from the UK economy so it doesn't circle back in towards us. Like for all their talk about how you can't tax the rich because then the millionaires might leave and take all their money with them, he's now trying to make it easier for them to take their money with them. And here's where things get crazy, because he's talking about how the interests of big business are different to the interests of small business.
It's what two big businesses want. And actually they want an environment that makes it as difficult as possible for small and medium-sized businesses to survive, to flourish, and to come and challenge their role in the marketplace.
What Nigel Farage is talking about there is the idea that if you have more red tape, more bureaucracy in business, then larger corporations are going to have the profit margins that allow them to just swallow that up, whereas smaller businesses can't afford to. Which is funny, because Nigel Farage and I have explicitly discussed exactly that. Back in 2017, before we'd actually left the EU, I called up his radio show and this happened.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. You led the Brexit campaign. You called it a victory for ordinary people.
Yes.
You said it was a victory against the multinationals and globalization.
I did.
And I just had a quick question. By leaving the single market, it makes it by definition more expensive to trade into the EU because you have to adapt your products to the legislation of 28 different countries where the rule is mutual recognition. Because mutual recognition is the rule that allows us to make a product in a certain way that matches UK legislation, which means that all other EU countries have to accept it. If you were a smaller company, that means it's harder for you to trade into Europe.
Should we obsess
It makes it more expensive
on the
to trade into the
15%
EU, and who does
of the
that
global
benefit?
It benefits the companies that are large enough to afford to export to it beyond the EU more than it benefits those who can barely afford to export to Europe. So, who does Brexit benefit?
Do you know what, Femi? Look, even if you reduce tariffs, the regulations that get put on small businesses are hardly a benefit in my view.
The extent to which I was right in that debate can never be overstated. For example, the Small Business Federation, which represents over 200,000 small businesses across the UK, so a little bit more than 300. They've been screaming out that Brexit has been damaging UK small businesses for the best part of a decade. Specifically, by adding to the red tape and bureaucracy that they have to face because the UK is no longer in the EU's legal jurisdiction. And in their message to Keir Starmer as he was taking office last year, they said location is very important and a lot of small businesses don't have the resources to take on distant markets. Vicinity is important. A lot of them have been put off by the additional burden that Brexit has caused. Funny because that sounds a lot like what I said to Nigel Farage in 2017, 8 years ago.
A smaller company can't afford to trade to Japan, to the Commonwealth.
Which means the entire Brexit narrative of global Britain, we don't need the EU, we'll just trade with the rest of the world, was bullshit. And now we have concrete evidence that Brexit, the policy that the Reform Party was founded upon, the policy that Nigel Farage pushed for 27 years, the only thing that he has on his CV has hurt smaller businesses more than it's hurt large corporations. Hell, let's even throw in the Bank of England.
Because I look at a lot of firm level data, and the small firms are the ones that are most damaged because the cost of the paperwork and so forth is a barrier. It's not just small firms in the UK who want to export, but it is also small firms in Europe who were suppliers and provided competition in the UK market. So there is an inflationary effect coming through the competition channel.
That brings in all of us as consumers, because if small businesses can't afford to trade anymore because of all the red tape that Brexit has created, then that means there's less competition to keep prices low, and that's one of the reasons things are getting so expensive. And when things get more expensive, it's the poorest people who suffer the most. So Nigel Farage has hurt the underdog, both in terms of businesses and in terms of British citizens.
And I think the other great betrayal, and it is that, is every one of these millions of businesses, every one of these 5.6 million businesses believed that with Brexit, the regulatory burden on their shoulders would become less.
I wonder who told them that. Oh yeah, it was Nigel Farage in 2010 saying we must stop small firms going out of business from crazy EU laws. And yet now,
a decade on almost from the referendum, that in every single industry, from financial services to fisheries, the burden of regulation, the threat of the regulator is worse now than it was then. We left the single market, which should have made life easier with the rest of the world, if a little trickier with Europe.
A little trickier with Europe. That's the way he's putting it. A little trickier with Europe. The cost of the red tape that Brexit has created because of Nigel Farage has been about £100 billion a year. That's according to the government's official economists, who say that Brexit long term has done more damage to our economy than COVID. It damaged our NHS during a pandemic, costing thousands of lives. And you're calling this a little trickier.
But we haven't changed anything else.
So that's the argument, that we've taken the damage of making trade with the EU a little trickier, but we haven't taken advantage of the benefits, which means by definition Brexit is a net negative for the UK. You have hurt the British people. And remember, Nigel Farage co-signed this Brexit by standing down Reform Party candidates in order to help Boris Johnson deliver this version of Brexit. And when he says that he'd do Brexit properly, the Reform Party's Brexit policy was to have no trade deal with the EU at all. And given that in 2018 the British Medical Association said that a no-deal Brexit would make us more vulnerable to deadly pandemics, and then a pandemic actually happened where our NHS was weaker because of Brexit, to still be advocating for no-deal Brexit now borders on treason. But yeah, anybody who thinks that Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are on the side of small businesses, you are insane. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics, so Politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.